Alright, YouTube. So I had to cut that previous video short because I ran out of space and it started getting pretty dark outside, as you can see towards the end of the video. So I decided to finish it up in here. So anyway, I was talking about the toe angles. Now, if you go online and look up this, you'll find a much better definition of it, and you'll also find nice pictures explaining it. But basically, the nervousness that you're feeling on the highway, and I suspect that this is the case, I have not put gauges on the car, so I cannot say for sure, is due to the car having toe out from the factory. Now, the reason what the toe angle controls, and the reason why manufacturers like Ford would probably decide to give you a bit of toe out from the factory, what it controls is the initial bite or the initial turning into the corner. Basically, the way how tires work is that you have to momentarily break some traction in order to change directions with a tire. A tire naturally wants to just continue going straight ahead. It does not want to turn, you know? Now, by slightly angling your tires out away from the vehicle, what you're actually doing is you're basically setting them up where the car is already slightly turning in one direction or the other. So what happens is when you turn the wheel, the response is instant, you know, in that direction. The problem with adjusting your toe angles is that when you set the car up for toe out, the car tends to get a little bit nervous at higher speeds. And that's the skittishness that people, I think, is the skittishness that people are talking about with these cars on the highway. It's not a big deal. And the good news is you don't have to spend a lot of money. All you have to do is take your car to an alignment shop and tell them that you want to have a little bit more toe in. And in about 10 or 20 minutes, they'll be able to do that for you. And they'll be able to dial some of that toe out. Well, dial some of that toe back in. And that, I guarantee, will cure the problem that you have. And again, but it's one of these things where suspension system, especially when it comes to setting up handling, you can't just change one thing without affecting the rest of the setup. So what will happen is by giving the car a little bit more toe in, what you will do is that you will lose some of your initial turning response. You'll lose some of that bite whenever you steer the wheel. So just keep that in mind when you do that modification. Another thing I wanted to talk about is a lot of people I've seen on YouTube have been suggesting that you do lowering springs on these cars, and I am not against modifying vehicles or anything like that, obviously, but I would recommend that if you're going to put lowering springs on your car, do not do it if you're also not planning to replace the shock absorbers. Do not use lowering springs on your factory shocks. I don't care if they're only a 1.5 drop. I don't care what iBox says or any of these companies. If you're going to change springs, also change your shocks. Now, the shock that you're looking for one that's going to have to be adjustable. And you're also looking for a shock that's physically shorter than the ones that you're taking off the vehicle. The reason why you want these two things is that when you drop the car, when you lower the car, if you keep it on the factory shocks, you're going to be losing some of that suspension travel that the shock is designed for. The other thing that you do, which arguably is another big problem, is that you really hurt the ride quality, because the way how an engineer decides, comes up with the dampening rates for the shocks is that they go off of the spring rates. So the shocks and the springs are designed to work with each other. If you lower the car, You'll have to go to a stiffer spring because that's pretty much the whole point of lowering it. What will happen is that your car will start doing this bouncing thing. And the reason why it's bouncing is because the shock absorbers aren't damped firmly enough to cope with the stiffer springs that you just put on the vehicle. So there you go. The way how you solve this problem is with an adjustable shock absorber that allows you to fine-tune the firmness of the shock, and therefore enable you to tune out a lot of that bounciness that will happen from the lowering springs. The other reason why you want a shorter shock, apart from you might run the risk of bottoming out the shock, is that you really want one that can still do the full traveling that the shock was designed for. If you don't have that, what will happen is that you'll overheat the fluid inside of the shock absorber, and eventually you'll blow those seals right out and leak oil all over the place. Ask me how I know. Yes. Okay? It's happened to me before. And this can happen really quickly. I'm talking about, like, you could put springs on your car and within a year or so, you just blow out your shocks, you know? So take my foolish advice. Do not lower your car without also replacing your shock absorbers. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. At least the two first things to talk about. Get to know your vehicle and, you know, take your car out and drive it and get to know it. You know, when I bought my car, the very first weekend that I got it, I drove up to North Carolina and I drove the Dragon, you know. Go to a racetrack or go drive a curvy road and get to really know the car before you start spending a bunch of money on it, because Ford gave us a hell of a machine. Like, this vehicle is incredible, you know. And in my opinion, it's perfect the way it is. But, you know, it's your money. Do what you want to do. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Thank you for watching.